The ocean has always been a place of mystery, where the line between legend and reality blurs beneath the rolling waves. But few tales unsettle the mind quite like the stories of ghost ships, phantom vessels that appear without warning, their ragged sails billowing in non-existent winds, only to vanish just as suddenly. Imagine standing on the deck of a ship one quiet night, the stars shimmering above, when a shadow looms on the horizon. A ship drifts toward you, silent and lifeless, its name worn away by time. No crew, no lights, just an eerie presence cutting through the fog. This isn't just a sailor's superstition. For centuries, these spectral sightings have been woven into the fabric of maritime lore, and what's even more chilling, many of them seem to foretell real disasters, tragedies that unfold days, weeks, or even years after the ghostly apparition is spotted. Take the Flying Dutchman, perhaps the most infamous ghost ship of all. According to legend, this cursed vessel is doomed to sail the seas forever, its appearance a harbinger of doom. Sailors who have claimed to see it describe an unearthly glow, a ship that moves impossibly fast against the wind, and those who witness it often meet with misfortune shortly after. But here's the thing, these aren't just campfire stories. There are documented cases where phantom ships were spotted before real-life maritime disasters, as if the ocean itself was sending a warning. What if these legends aren't just myths? What if they're glimpses into something far stranger, a connection between the unseen world and our own? That's what we're diving into today, the spine-tingling accounts of ghost ships that predicted real catastrophes. From ancient mythology to modern-day sightings, these stories blur the boundaries between coincidence and prophecy. We'll explore the eerie parallels between legend and history, uncovering how tales like the Flying Dutchman might hold unsettling truth. So stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you might just look at the open sea a little differently. The waves have secrets, and some of them are older than we can imagine. Are you ready to hear them? The legend of the Flying Dutchman begins in the 17th century, a time when the Dutch East India Company ruled the waves and superstition was as common as salt in the air. The story goes that a captain, often named as Hendrik van der Decken, was determined to round the Cape of Good Hope during a vicious storm. When his crew begged him to turn back, he swore he would sail on until doomsday, even if it meant defying God himself. For his arrogance, the ship was cursed to haunt the seas for eternity, its phantom crew forever trapped between the living and the dead. But what makes this tale more than just a morality story is how often people claim to have seen it, and how often disaster follows. One of the most chilling accounts comes from 1881, when Prince Albert Victor and Prince George, later King George V, were serving aboard the HMS Inconstant. As they sailed near Australia, the crew spotted a ghostly vessel glowing with an unnatural red light, its sails full despite the still air. The ship passed so close they could see its rigging in detail before vanishing into the night. Just days later, their own ship narrowly escaped catastrophe in a sudden, violent storm. Coincidence, maybe, but similar stories span centuries. In 1835, sailors off the coast of England reported the Dutchman racing through a gale, only for their own ship to founder hours later. Even during World War II, a submarine crew claimed to have witnessed the specter before their mission took a deadly turn. The common thread in these sightings isn't just the ship's eerie appearance, it's the timing. Whether by royal sailors or common deckhands, the Dutchman is almost always seen just before tragedy strikes. Some say it's a trick of the light, a mirage caused by atmospheric conditions. But when you hear the same details repeated across generations, the unnatural glow, the impossible speed, the silence, it's hard to dismiss them all as mere hallucinations. Perhaps the ocean remembers its dead, or perhaps, as some whisper, the Dutchman isn't just a warning, it's an omen, a piece of the future drifting into the present. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: when the mist rolls in and the air grows still, even the most skeptical sailors keep their eyes on the horizon. The SS Valencia's story is one of those chilling cases where the line between tragedy and the supernatural seems to blur. In 1906, this passenger steamship met its grim fate off the coast of Vancouver Island, smashing into the rocky cliffs during a brutal storm. Over 100 souls were lost in the wreck, their cries swallowed by the roaring waves, but the horror didn't end there. For decades afterward, sailors reported seeing the Valencia reappear, its ghostly form drifting through the same waters where it had sunk, as if trapped in an endless loop of its final moments. What makes these sightings so unsettling isn't just the ship's spectral return. It's the fact that they often preceded fresh disasters, as though history itself was echoing. One of the most well-documented encounters happened in 1923, when fishermen near Pashina Point swore they saw a steamship with a distinct red hull, just like the Valencia materializing out of the fog. The ship appeared intact, its lights blazing, but something was off. No crew moved on deck, and the vessel made no sound as it glided past before dissolving into the mist. Mere hours later, a nearby schooner capsized in freakishly sudden squalls, vanishing beneath the waves without a trace. Then, in 1933, lighthouse keepers at Carmona Point watched in disbelief as a spectral steamship emerged from the darkness, its silhouette unmistakably matching the Valencia. That same night, a tugboat towing barges mysteriously lost power and was nearly dashed against the rocks, surviving only by sheer luck. The pattern is impossible to ignore. Whether it's fishermen, lighthouse operators, or even modern-day Coast Guard patrols, those who have glimpsed the phantom Valencia often find themselves facing calamity soon after. Skeptics argue it's mass hysteria or tricks of the light, but the consistency of the details is haunting. Witnesses across different eras describe the same eerie stillness, the same ghostly lights, the same uncanny sense of dread. Some theorize these apparitions are a form of time slip, a momentary breach where past and present overlap. Others believe the ocean itself holds memories, replaying its tragedies as warnings to those who dare to sail its depths. Perhaps the most spine-tingling detail is that the Valencia's wreck site became known as the Graveyard of the Pacific long after the disaster, a stretch of water notorious for swallowing ships under eerily similar circumstances. Coincidence, or is the ghost ship's reappearance not just an echo of the past, but a dark prophecy written in the waves? Whatever the explanation, one thing's certain: when the fog rolls in off Vancouver Island, seasoned sailors still steer wide of those cliffs. Some legends don't fade, they linger, waiting to repeat. Off the mist-shrouded coast of Chile, where the Pacific's waves crash against ancient myths, sailors whisper of a ship that defies all logic, the Caleuche. Unlike the phantom vessels we've explored so far, this isn't just a ghostly apparition. It's a shapeshifter, a living nightmare woven into the fabric of Chilean folklore. Legends say the Caleuche appears as a dazzlingly bright ship one moment, its decks alive with music and laughter, only to morph into a rotting hulk the next, its sails tattered and its hull groaning with the weight of the drowned. But what chills the bones of those who have glimpsed it isn't just its eerie transformation, it's the uncanny way its sightings align with natural disasters, as if the ship itself is a harbinger of the ocean's wrath. The Caleuche's origins are steeped in the spiritual beliefs of the Chilete people, who have long viewed the sea as a boundary between worlds. According to tradition, the ship is crewed by the souls of those lost at sea, guided by a powerful sorcerer known as the Brujo Chilote. By day, these spirits rest beneath the waves in a mythical underwater city called Trentrenvillu, but by night they rise to sail the Caleuche, its glowing form skimming the surface as it collects new souls for its macabre voyage. Witnesses describe hearing faint strains of accordion music drifting across the water, or seeing the ship's lights flicker like drowned stars, only for the vision to vanish moments before a storm erupts or the earth trembles beneath a tsunami's approach. One of the most striking accounts comes from the Great Earthquake of 1960, which sent towering waves crashing into the Chilean coast. Hours before the disaster, fishermen near Ancud reported a luminous ship moving against the current, its silhouette shifting between a grand galleon and a shadowy wreck. As the ship faded into the mist, the water grew eerily calm, a deceptive lull that gave way to one of the deadliest tsunamis in recorded history. Similar stories emerged after the 2010 quake, where coastal villagers swore they'd seen the Caleuche gliding near the horizon days before the sea surged inland. Even modern Navy patrols have logged inexplicable radar blips in the region, phantom echoes that vanish without a trace, often followed by violent swells or sudden squalls. What makes the Caleuche stand apart from other ghost ships is its dual nature. It's not just an omen of doom, it's a liminal space where joy and horror collide. Some legends claim the ship's crew dances eternally, their celebrations a cruel mockery of the lives they once led. Others say the Caleuche offers a grotesque mercy, granting drowned souls a final night of revelry before dragging them into the depths forever. This duality mirrors the sea itself, beautiful one moment, deadly the next, and perhaps that's the most unsettling truth hidden in these tales. The Caleuche isn't just a warning, it's a mirror held up to the ocean's capricious heart, a reminder that even in our age of satellites and sonar, the deep remains a place of mystery and menace. So the next time you stand on a shore where the fog curls like smoke and the waves whisper secrets, listen closely. The music you hear might just be the Caleuche tuning its ghostly orchestra, a prelude to the sea's next act of fury. In the frozen silence of the Arctic, where ice groans like a waking beast and the horizon stretches endlessly white, there sails a ghost ship unlike any other, the SS Baychimo. This steel-hulled cargo steamer was abandoned in 1931, trapped by pack ice off the coast of Alaska. Crews tried to free her, but the Arctic refused to let go. Eventually, they left her for dead, assuming the ice would crush her hull within weeks. Yet the Baychimo had other plans. For the next 4 decades, she would reappear like a specter of the north, drifting unmanned through the floes, her rusted figure seen by hunters, traders, and even pilots always just before the weather turned deadly or trade routes collapsed. To the Inuit communities who spotted her, the Baychimo wasn't just a ship, she was a warning. Elders spoke of her sudden appearances near coastal villages as omens of hard winters to come, when seals would vanish and caribou herds would thin. In 1932, a group of hunters near Wainwright watched the Baychimo materialize through a blizzard, her deck piled with phantom cargo. That winter, the ice was so thick that supply ships couldn't reach them, leaving the village to ration what little they had. Again in 1936, fur traders anchored near Point Barrow saw the ship's silhouette loom through the midnight sun, only for a freak storm to destroy their outpost days later. Even when scientists tried to board her in 1962, the Baychimo slipped away, vanishing into the fog as if she'd never been there at all. What makes the Baychimo's legend so unsettling is how stubbornly she defies explanation. Most ghost ships fade into myth after a few sightings, but this one was documented by newspapers, naval patrols, and even the Hudson's Bay Company. Her reappearances weren't just eerie, they were timed with uncanny precision. In 1944, a Canadian Mountie patrolling the Beaufort Sea spotted the Baychimo adrift, her hull eerily intact despite decades of exposure. Within weeks, wartime supply lines to the Arctic froze over, stranding remote bases. Then in 1969, Inuit fishermen near Tuktoyaktuk watched her glide past their boats, her smokestack silent. That same year, the region's worst ice storm in memory shattered trap lines and cut off trade for months. Some say the Baychimo is a prisoner of the Arctic's whims, a plaything of currents and ice flows. But the Inuit know better. To them, she's Tuungak, a spirit of the land and sea, embodying the harsh balance between survival and sacrifice. When she appears, it's not just a ship they see, but the Arctic itself stirring, restless. Modern skeptics argue she was simply a stubborn wreck, kept afloat by the very ice that once trapped her. Yet no one can explain why sightings stopped abruptly in the 1970s, just as industrial shipping began to dominate the north. Perhaps the Baychimo finally found rest when the old ways faded, or perhaps she's still out there, waiting in the endless white, ready to sail again when the ice whispers her name. One thing's certain, in the Arctic, where the wind carries the voices of ancestors and the ice hides centuries of secrets, the line between the living and the forgotten is as thin as a snowflake's edge. The Baychimo may be steel and rivets, but her story is written in something far older. The kind of truth that lingers in the creak of a ship's hull, the sigh of shifting ice, and the quiet dread of those who have seen her empty decks loom out of the gathering dark. In the summer of 1947, an unsettling distress signal crackled across the radio waves, a transmission that would become one of the most chilling maritime mysteries of all time. The call came from the SS Valencia, a Dutch freighter sailing near the Straits of Malacca. The voice on the other end was frantic, barely coherent, as if the speaker was gasping for air between words. All officers dead, crew dying. The message dissolved into static before a final, bone-chilling phrase, "I die." Then silence. When rescue ships reached the Valencia hours later, they found a ghost ship in the truest sense. Every single crew member was dead, their corpses sprawled across the deck, faces frozen in expressions of sheer terror, eyes wide and mouths twisted into silent screams. Stranger still, there were no visible wounds, no signs of struggle, just an overwhelming sense that something unspeakable had swept through the ship like an invisible hand. Theories about what happened aboard the Valencia range from plausible to downright paranormal. Some investigators suggested a carbon monoxide leak from the ship's aging coal-fired engines, silently suffocating the crew. Others pointed to volatile cargo chemical weapons or smuggled nitroglycerin, accidentally exposed to the tropical heat. But the most haunting detail defies all logical explanations. The ship's radio operator had time to send that final, desperate message before succumbing himself. If it was poison gas, why didn't he flee? If it was an explosion, why was the ship eerily intact? Even the rescuers felt it. A creeping dread so palpable that they hastily evacuated, leaving the Valencia adrift. Hours later, smoke billowed from below decks, and the ship vanished beneath the waves in a sudden, violent explosion, as if the ocean itself was determined to bury its secrets. What makes this story more than just a tragedy is how it echoes older legends of cursed voyages. In the days following the incident, sailors in nearby ports swapped stories about the Valencia's final moments, whispers of shadows moving independently across the deck or an unnatural cold settling over the ship despite the sweltering heat. These accounts mirror ancient tales from the same waters, where Malay and Indonesian folklore speaks of hantu laut, sea spirits who claim ships as their own. Even the timing feels ominous. The Valencia incident occurred just as global shipping was rebounding after World War II, a stark reminder that the ocean's dangers weren't only storms and reefs, but something far more enigmatic. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect is how the Valencia's fate became a grim benchmark for industrial maritime disasters. In the decades since, whenever a ship is found adrift with no clear explanation, like the MV Joita in 1955 or the Cas-2 in 2007, comparisons to the Valencia inevitably surface. It's as if the story crystallized a primal fear that the modern world's steel hulls and radio signals are no match for whatever lurks in the deep. The official records may dismiss the Valencia as a case of cause unknown, but those three words carry more weight than any explanation. Because in the end, the greatest terror isn't the mystery itself, it's the realization that some questions, no matter how hard we search, will never have answers. And the sea, vast and indifferent, is content to keep them. The Mississippi River holds its own dark legends, but few are as haunting as the tale of the Eliza Battle. On a cold March night in 1858, this grand steamboat was carrying wealthy passengers and bales of cotton upriver when fire erupted in the cargo hold. Flames spread so quickly that those asleep barely had time to wake before the ship became an inferno. Panicked passengers leaped into the icy water, their screams swallowed by the roar of the blaze. By dawn, the Eliza Battle was a charred skeleton on the riverbank, and over 30 lives had been lost. But unlike ordinary tragedies, this one didn't fade into history. Within months, rivermen began reporting something impossible: a ghostly steamboat wreathed in spectral flames, gliding silently along the same stretch of river where the battle had burned. What sent chills down the spines of seasoned boatmen wasn't just the apparition itself, but when it appeared. The burning phantom was most often spotted in the hours before another steamboat disaster, usually a boiler explosion or fire. In 1860, a crew on the Robert E. Lee swore they saw the Eliza Battle's outline flickering in the mist moments before their own boiler ruptured, killing 12. Decades later, in 1902, a ferry pilot near Columbus, Mississippi, reported the ghost ship passing so close he could feel phantom heat radiating from its flames, only for his vessel to catch fire that same night. Even into the 1920s, dredge workers on the Tombigbee River avoided certain bends after dark, convinced the battle's glowing wreck was a death omen. Steamboat culture was steeped in superstition, but the Eliza Battle's legend stood apart. Engineers took her sightings as dire warnings to check their boilers. Deckhands whispered that her flames burned coldest just before the worst accidents, a sign the river itself was restless. Some believed the phantom wasn't just a warning, it was a reenactment, the battle eternally reliving its agony to remind others of the river's wrath. Others claimed the ship carried the souls of those who'd burned alive, doomed to repeat their final voyage whenever death stirred the waters anew. What makes these accounts so compelling is their eerie consistency across generations. Whether in logbooks from the 1860s or oral histories collected in the 1930s, witnesses describe the same unnatural glow, the same unnatural silence. Modern skeptics dismiss it as fog refracting light or the power of suggestion, but that doesn't explain why sightings peaked during periods of high riverboat fatalities. Perhaps the Eliza Battle is more than a ghost story. Perhaps she's a dark echo of the industrial age's dangers, a reminder that progress and peril often travel the same currents. The next time you stand on the Mississippi's banks at dusk, watch the water. That flicker on the horizon might just be a distant barge's lamp, or it might be something far older, something that refuses to sink beneath the waves, a ship of fire and memory sailing on toward disaster once more. The Arctic has always been a keeper of secrets, its vast white expanse swallowing ships and men whole without a trace. But few tales freeze the blood like the legend of the Octavius, a ghost ship not merely lost to the ice but eerily preserved within it. In 1775, a whaling vessel off the coast of Greenland spotted a derelict ship drifting silently among the floes. Boarding cautiously, the crew found a scene from a nightmare. The entire crew of the Octavius frozen solid, their bodies perfectly preserved in the sub-zero cold. The captain sat at his desk, pen still clutched in his stiffened hand, as if mid-sentence when death claimed him. Logbooks revealed the grim truth. The Octavius had been trapped in the ice for 13 years, its crew slowly succumbing to the cold. But the real horror lay in the ship's impossible journey. Somehow it had drifted through the Northwest Passage, a route no ship had survived at the time, its dead crew unknowingly achieving what no living sailor could. Decades later, the Octavius began appearing in the stories of Arctic explorers, always under the same chilling circumstances. In 1845, crewmen from the HMS Terror, one of the doomed ships in Franklin's lost expedition, reported seeing a spectral vessel matching the Octavius's description days before their own ships became hopelessly icebound. Inuit hunters near King William Island in the 1850s spoke of a wooden island with frozen men inside, glimpse just before brutal blizzards sealed off hunting grounds for months. Even during the ill-fated Jeannette expedition of 1879, sailors claimed to spot a ghostly hull emerging from the fog, its rigging encased in ice only for their own ship to be crushed by pack ice weeks later. What sets the Octavius apart from other phantom ships is the unsettling specificity of its curse. Unlike the Flying Dutchman's vague doom or the Caleuche's shape-shifting terror, this ship's appearances align with a very real Arctic danger, the moment when ice shifts from obstacle to executioner. The whalers who first discovered the Octavius noted its hull was unnaturally intact, as if the ice had cradled rather than crushed it, a detail that mirrors Inuit beliefs about the Arctic's dual nature. To some indigenous communities, sea ice is alive, capable of both granting passage and claiming tribute. The Octavius, frozen mid-voyage with its crew eternally at their posts, embodies that balance between preservation and predation. Modern explanations point to the cold storage effect of Arctic conditions, where ships abandoned in the floes can drift for decades with minimal decay. But that logic falters when confronted with the timing of sightings. From Franklin's era to early 20th century polar expeditions, the Octavius's phantom seems to materialize when the ice is on the verge of movement, a harbinger not just of danger but of frozen time itself unraveling. Perhaps that's why the legend endures. In a place where compasses spin wildly and the sun vanishes for months, the Octavius serves as a grim reminder: the Arctic doesn't just kill. It preserves, and sometimes it sends its preserved lessons back, still gripping their pens, still waiting to be read. So the next time you see an old photograph of a wooden ship locked in the ice, look closely. The shadows on the deck might just be tricks of the light, or they might be figures standing perfectly still, their faces turned toward you, their silence louder than any storm. The Octavius may be a warning from the past, but in the Arctic, the past is never truly gone. It's simply waiting, frozen, for the next ship to sail too close to the edge of the map. The Carroll A. Deering wasn't just another abandoned ship. It was a riddle wrapped in saltwater and silence. When this 5-masted schooner was found stranded on Diamond Shoals, North Carolina, in January 1921, the scene was straight out of a nightmare. The ship's sails were still set, as if ready to catch the wind, but not a soul remained on board. The crew's personal belongings lay untouched in their quarters, meals were set out in the galley, and the ship's logbook was missing along with the lifeboats. It was as if the entire crew had simply vanished into thin air. No struggle, no distress call, just an eerie emptiness that defied explanation. But what turned this mystery into legend were the sightings that followed. For years afterward, sailors reported glimpses of the Deering's ghostly silhouette drifting through the fog off the Carolina coast, always just before another vessel disappeared without a trace in the nearby Bermuda Triangle. One of the most unsettling encounters happened in 1934, when a freighter captain radioed in a panicked report of a 5-masted schooner matching the Deering's description, its tattered sails billowing despite the dead calm. The ghost ship passed within 100 yards before dissolving into the mist. Hours later, a storm erupted out of nowhere, swallowing a small fishing fleet whole. Again in 1942, a Navy patrol plane spotted what looked like the Deering's wreck off Cape Hatteras, only for the coordinates to yield nothing when a search team arrived. That same week, 2 cargo ships vanished along the same route, their last transmissions mentioning sudden instrument failures and an unnatural haze. Coincidence? Maybe, but when the pattern repeats across decades, even the most hardened sailors start questioning the odds. Theories about the Deering's fate range from the practical to the paranormal. Some historians blame mutiny, pointing to rumors of discord among the crew before their disappearance. Others suggest piracy, though no valuables were taken. Then there's the more chilling possibility that the ship fell victim to the same force that later claimed so many others in the Bermuda Triangle. Witnesses who have seen the phantom Deering describe strange details, compasses spinning wildly, radios emitting static even in clear weather, and an overwhelming sense of dread creeping in before the apparition fades. These accounts mirror those of Triangle survivors, where ships and planes vanish amid electrical anomalies and sudden fog banks. Perhaps the most haunting clue lies in the Deering's final log entries, recovered years later from a coastal inn. The last readable words, "all hands missing," not overboard, not lost, missing, as if they'd been plucked from the deck by something beyond the sea's ordinary dangers. Whether the ship's ghostly reappearances are echoes of that moment or warnings of tragedies yet to come, one thing's certain: when the mist rolls in off Cape Hatteras, seasoned sailors still scan the horizon for 5 masts where none should be. The Deering may be gone, but its mystery sails on a silent sentinel of the graveyard of the Atlantic, where the line between the lost and the waiting grows thinner with every passing year. The waters off the Kent coast hold a legend as persistent as the tides, the cursed voyage of the Lady Lovibond. Back in February 1748, this 3-masted schooner met a violent end on the Goodwin Sands, one of Britain's most notorious ship graveyards. The story goes that the ship's captain, Simon Peel, was celebrating his wedding aboard, bringing his new bride along for what should have been a joyous journey. But jealousy festered in the heart of his first mate, who secretly loved the bride himself. In a fit of madness, he deliberately steered the ship onto the treacherous sandbanks, dooming everyone on board. The wreck faded into history until the whispers began. Locals claimed the Lady Lovibond didn't just sink. She became bound to the sands, reappearing like clockwork every 50 years, her ghostly form heralding fresh tragedies along the same stretch of coast. One of the most chilling sightings occurred in February 1948, exactly 2 centuries after the original wreck. Fishermen returning from the North Sea reported seeing a 3-masted sailing ship with tattered sails glowing faintly in the moonlight, drifting eerily toward the Goodwin Sands. As they watched, the ship seemed to dissolve into the mist. Within days, a ferocious storm battered the Kent coastline, sinking multiple vessels and claiming dozens of lives. The timing was too precise to ignore, especially when history repeated itself 50 years later. In February 1998, lifeboat crews responding to a mayday call found no distressed ship, just an odd haze over the sands. But several witnesses, including a Coast Guard patrol, swore they'd glimpsed an antiquated schooner with a crimson hull, the Lady Lovibond's signature color, before a sudden squall capsized 2 cargo ships nearby. What makes the Lady Lovibond different from other phantom vessels is the eerie regularity of her appearances. Most ghost ships are random, their sightings unpredictable. But this one follows a pattern as reliable as a cursed almanac, tied to the 50-year cycle. Folklorists point to the number's significance in maritime superstition, 5 decades representing a ship's lifetime in old sailor lore. Skeptics argue it's coincidence magnified by selective memory, but the consistency of the details chills the blood. Witnesses across different eras describe the same phantom wedding music drifting across the water, the same unnatural glow around the sails, the same sense of dread creeping in before disaster strikes. Local fishermen still swap stories about the Bride of the Sands, as they call her, a spectral woman in a wedding gown sometimes spotted on the deck, her cries lost in the wind. Some say she's the captain's bride, eternally reliving her doomed celebration. Others believe the ship itself is a living wound, the sands bleeding history back into the present every half-century. Whatever the truth, one thing's certain: when the calendar nears February in a year ending in 48 or 98, the bravest sailors along the Kent coast keep extra watch. Because the Lady Lovibond doesn't just haunt the Goodwin Sands, she keeps an appointment with tragedy, and the sea never forgets a date. The winter of 1738 was one of the cruelest New England had ever seen, the kind of cold that gnawed at bones and turned the sea to jagged teeth. It was in this merciless season that the Palatine, a ship crammed with German immigrants seeking new lives in America, met its horrific fate off Block Island. Battered by storms and half-starved, the passengers had already endured weeks of nightmarish conditions. Some whispered the vessel was cursed from the moment it left Rotterdam. When the Palatine finally ran aground near what's now called Palatine Point, the wreck descended into chaos. Locals claimed some islanders looted the ship instead of helping, leaving the survivors to freeze among the ice-lashed rocks. But the true horror began after the wreck. For centuries, fishermen and lighthouse keepers have reported an eerie glow hovering above the waves where the Palatine sank, a pulsating, otherworldly light that flares brightest on the stormiest nights, as if the sea itself is exhaling the ship's final breath. What chills the spine isn't just the ghostly phenomenon, it's the timing. The Palatine Light, as it's known, often appears before immigrant ships face disaster. In 1849, a schooner crew swore they saw the glow off Newport the night before the Elizabeth capsized, drowning 30 Irish refugees. Again in 1892, Block Islanders watched the light flicker over the water days before the Narragansett disappeared with 200 Italian passengers aboard. Even in the 20th century, the pattern held. Weeks before the General Slocum burned in New York Harbor in 1904, still the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in U.S. history, a ferry captain reported the Palatine Light burning unnaturally bright, though the wreck site was miles away. Folklorists argue the light represents collective guilt, New England's uneasy conscience over the Palatine's brutal fate. Colonial records hint at darker rumors that some survivors were murdered for their meager possessions, their screams muffled by the howling wind. The light, then, might be more than a ghost story. It could be a warning etched into the coastline itself, a beacon for those about to repeat history's mistakes. Modern skeptics dismiss it as bioluminescent algae or methane flares, but that doesn't explain why the glow only manifests in certain years, or why those who have seen it describe an unnatural intelligence to its movements, like a lantern being carried by invisible hands along the shore. The most unsettling detail, the Palatine Light's appearances align with waves of immigrant hardship far beyond the sea. In 1919, the year the Red Scare sparked violent xenophobia, fishermen claimed the glow stretched inland, pulsing red over Providence. During World War II, a Coast Guard patrol saw the light form a perfect cross above the water the night before a U-boat sank a troop transport carrying European refugees. Whether coincidence or curse, one thing's clear. When the Palatine Light burns over Block Island, it doesn't just signal danger. It mirrors the fears of those still chasing the American dream across treacherous waters. And sometimes the darkest shadows are cast not by what sinks, but by what refuses to stay buried. The Mississippi River has swallowed countless ships over the centuries, but few vanishings haunt the rivermen like the mystery of the Iron Mountain. In the pre-dawn hours of June 7, 1872, this sturdy steamboat was last seen churning upriver near Memphis, her holds packed with cotton and her boiler burning steady. By sunrise, she was gone, no wreckage, no bodies, just an empty stretch of water where she should have been. The disappearance made no sense. The river was calm that night with no storms to blame. No explosion echoed across the banks. It was as if the Iron Mountain had sailed straight out of this world. Yet within months the sightings began, a ghostly steamer materializing in the river mist, its paddle wheel churning soundlessly, its silhouette unmistakable even through the fog. And every time it appeared, the old boatmen would mutter the same warning: the river was about to rise. There's something about the Mississippi that breeds superstition. Those who work its waters know it's more than just a river. It's a living thing, capricious and vengeful. So when the Iron Mountain's phantom started appearing before floods, the rivermen paid attention. In 1874, a snag boat crew near Vicksburg spotted the steamer drifting against the current, its smokestacks belching phantom smoke. 3 days later, the river surged over its banks, swallowing entire towns. Again in 1881, a lumber raft pilot saw the Iron Mountain's outline glowing pale in the moonlight near Helena. Arkansas, just as the first raindrops of a historic deluge began to fall. Even into the 20th century, towboat captains radioed in panicked reports of the long-lost vessel reappearing hours before levees broke, its spectral whistle drowned out by the coming roar of floodwaters. What sets the Iron Mountain apart from other river ghosts is how unnervingly specific the sightings are. Witnesses describe the same cracked smokestack, the same distinctive pilot house trim, details that match historical records of the vanished ship. In 1927, during the Great Mississippi Flood that displaced hundreds of thousands, multiple crews swore they saw the Iron Mountain leading a phantom flotilla of other lost steamers, their ghostly wakes churning the water into a frenzy before the real flood hit. Some say it's the river's way of mourning its dead. Others believe the ship itself is trapped in a loop, endlessly reliving its final moments before whatever force took it claims new victims. Scientists dismiss the phenomenon as fog banks playing tricks on tired eyes, but those who have worked the river their whole lives know better. They'll tell you the Mississippi keeps its dead close, and sometimes when the water grows restless, it sends them back as warnings. The Iron Mountain isn't just a ghost story, it's a lesson written in steam and shadow. When the mist curls just right and the air hangs heavy with the scent of wet cotton, even the most rational pilot will throttle down and listen for the sound of a paddle wheel that shouldn't be there. Because on this river, the past doesn't stay buried. It surfaces when the current stirs, a silent sentinel of disasters yet to come. The SS Wairarta was meant to be the pride of Australia's merchant fleet, a luxury liner so sturdy, her builders boasted she was practically unsinkable. Yet in July 1909, on only her second voyage, the ship vanished without a trace off the treacherous coast of South Africa, taking 211 souls with her. No wreckage, no distress call, just an eerie emptiness where a 500-foot steamship should have been. Search crews scoured the coast for months, but the Wairarta had simply slipped into the abyss, leaving behind only whispers and a chilling pattern of sightings that would haunt the shipping lanes for decades. Because the Wairarta didn't just disappear, it began reappearing in the moments before other ships met their doom. The first phantom sighting came just months after the disaster. In October 1909, the crew of the freighter clan McIntyre reported a steamship matching the Wairarta's description drifting silently near Port Elizabeth, her portholes dark and decks empty. As they watched, the ship faded into the fog, an omen that proved fatally accurate. The next morning, the clan McIntyre's engines failed in heavy swells, nearly sending her onto the rocks. Over the years, similar stories piled up. In 1925, passengers aboard the Union Castle liner Dover Castle swore they saw the Wairarta's silhouette looming off Durban hours before their ship collided with a tramp steamer in dense fog. Decades later, in 1969, a South African naval patrol logged radar contact with an unidentified vessel near the Wairarta's last known position, a blip that vanished seconds before a freak wave capsized a nearby trawler. But the strangest part of the Wairarta's legend isn't just the ghostly sightings, it's the premonitions. Several passengers had reportedly cancelled their bookings before the doomed voyage, citing nightmares of drowning or visions of the ship consumed by flames. One woman, Clara Crossley, even claimed her husband, a sailor who'd worked the Australian run, woke her weeks before the disaster, shouting about a ship with no lights he'd seen in a dream. He died aboard the Wairarta. These accounts mirror other maritime curses like the Titanic's infamous Mummy's Curse rumors or the Essex whalers' pre-voyage omens. Yet the Wairarta's case stands apart. Unlike those tales which were embellished after the fact, newspaper archives show these premonitions were documented before the ship vanished, a detail that chills historians to this day. Modern explanations point to the Agulhas Current, a deadly convergence of tides off South Africa where warm and cold waters collide, creating rogue waves capable of swallowing even the sturdiest ships whole. But that logic falters when confronted with the Wairarta's ghostly legacy. How could a ship lost to natural forces imprint itself so vividly on the collective memory of the sea? Indigenous Xhosa fishermen have their own answer. They've long spoken of Umlindi Wemengizimu, the Watcher of the South, a spirit said to guard the threshold between the living and the drowned. To them, the Water isn't just a ghost ship, it's become part of the current itself, a warning written in salt and shadow. So the next time you stand on a South African shore and see mist curling like smoke over the waves, look closely. That shape in the distance might just be a passing freighter, or it might be something far older, something the sea refuses to forget, a ship still sailing its final route, forever on the edge of vanishing, forever waiting for the next vessel to follow it into the dark. The Pacific has always been a realm of vanishing islands that slip beneath the waves, stars that guide sailors to nowhere, and ships that dissolve into the horizon. But few disappearances unsettle the modern mind like the mystery of the MV Joyita. In October 1955, this sturdy 65-foot merchant vessel set sail from Samoa with 25 souls aboard, bound for the Tokelau Islands. The weather was calm, the crew experienced, yet 5 weeks later the Joyita was found drifting near Fiji, partially submerged, her decks empty, no lifeboats. No bodies, and strangest of all, no explanation. The radio was tuned to the international distress frequency, yet no call was ever sent. The ship's logbook was missing, but the engines were still running, propelling the derelict forward as if her vanished crew had stepped away moments before. What turned this incident from tragedy to legend were the sightings that followed. Within months, fishermen across the South Pacific began reporting eerie encounters. A battered white hull glimpsed through the mist, always just before another vessel met with disaster. In 1956, a Tongan trawler crew swore they saw the Joyita's ghostly outline at sunset near the Lau Islands, her portholes dark. Hours later, their engine failed in dead calm seas, leaving them adrift for days. Again in 1962, Solomon Islanders watched a ship matching the Joyita's description materialize off Maleta, its hull unnaturally intact despite years of saltwater decay. That same night, a cargo schooner vanished without a trace along the same route. To Pacific Islanders, these apparitions weren't random hauntings, they were tapu, sacred warnings woven into the fabric of maritime tradition. Elders in Fiji spoke of the Joyita as a vaka yolo, a spirit vessel carrying souls too restless to reach the afterlife. Some claimed its appearances coincided with seismic shifts, underwater eruptions, or sudden trenches opening beneath unsuspecting ships. Others whispered that the Joyita had sailed into Tipo, the Polynesian underworld, only to be spit back out whenever the ocean grew hungry. These beliefs found eerie parallels in the official investigation. Divers noted the Joyita's hull was lined with cork, making her nearly unsinkable, yet somehow flooded. Survivors of nearby wrecks described sudden, inexplicable listings, as if something beneath the waves was pulling vessels down. The most unsettling detail, modern sonar scans have revealed no wreckage where the Joyita was last seen intact. It's as if the ship exists in two places at once, rusting on the ocean floor while her phantom still patrols the surface. Scientists blame the Pacific garbage patch or mirages caused by equatorial heat, but those who have seen her know better. When the trade winds still and the horizon blurs, the Joyita returns, not as a relic but as a reminder. The Pacific keeps what it takes, and sometimes it sends pieces back to teach the living. The next time you cross these waters, watch the edge of the light. That shape in the distance might just be a fishing boat, or it might be something older, something that shouldn't be there, a ship with no crew, sailing on toward a port that no longer exists. The English Channel is no stranger to ghost ships, but few cases blur the line between maritime mystery and wartime omen quite like the Sabrina. On October 18, 1917, this three-masted schooner was found drifting near the French coast, her sails still set, her cargo of Welsh coal untouched. No lifeboats were missing, no signs of struggle marred her decks. The crew's personal belongings, pipes, playing cards, even half-drunk cups of tea, sat exactly where they'd been left. It was as if the entire crew had simply stepped off the ship into thin air. Yet what turned this oddity into legend wasn't just the abandonment, it was where and when the Zabrina reappeared in the years that followed. Fishermen and naval patrols began spotting her spectral form gliding through the same waters, always in the eerie calm before major sea battles of World War I. One of the most chilling encounters occurred just before the Battle of Jutland in May 1916, months before the Zabrina's actual abandonment. A British destroyer crew reported seeing a schooner matching her description sailing against the wind near Dogger Bank, her hull glowing faintly in the moonlight. When they signaled her, the ship vanished without a trace. Hours later, the skies erupted with gunfire as the largest naval clash of the war began, claiming nearly 9,000 lives. Similar sightings peppered the war's darkest chapters. In February 1917, U-boat officers logged a derelict schooner drifting near the Dover Strait, the same stretch where the Zabrina would later be found, only for their periscope to fog inexplicably as the ship dissolved into the mist. That same night, their submarine struck a mine, sinking with all hands. Theories about the Zabrina's curse range from wartime propaganda to supernatural intervention. Some historians suggest the crew fell victim to a German raider or experimental weapon, a plausible explanation, except no nation ever claimed responsibility. Others point to the channel fog hypothesis, where peculiar weather conditions create mirages of lost ships, but that doesn't account for the timing. Every verified sighting preceded a naval tragedy, often by mere hours. Even the ship's final voyage adds to the mystery. The Zabrina had been transporting coal, a fuel that powered the very warships whose battle she seemed to foreshadow. Was her abandoned state a symbolic warning of the war's coming hunger for lives? Or was she, like the coal in her hold, merely fuel for the superstitions of frightened sailors? To veterans of the Great War, the answer didn't matter. For them, the Zabrina became more than a ship. She was a floating memorial, a silent witness to the Channel's endless appetite for young men and iron. Long after the armistice, lighthouse keepers reported her shadow slipping through the fog on anniversaries of major battles, her sails tattered but her course unwavering. The sea has countless ways to mourn its dead. Some it drowns, some it preserves, and some, like the Zabrina, it sends back, not as wrecks but as reminders, gliding forever between the living and the lost. The SS Great Eastern wasn't just a ship, it was a statement. When launched in 1858, this colossal iron steamship was the largest vessel ever built, a floating city stretching nearly 700 feet, designed to carry 4,000 passengers non-stop from England to Australia. A marvel of industrial ambition, its very existence defied the limits of 19th century engineering. But from the moment its keel touched water, the Great Eastern seemed cursed. Workers whispered of crushed limbs during construction, of rivets mysteriously falling from scaffolds, of a forgotten corpse sealed between its double hull, rumors that only grew when the ship's launch nearly bankrupted its creator, the brilliant but doomed engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Yet the real horror began after its retirement, when the Great Eastern, stripped of its grandeur, started appearing as a ghostly precursor to maritime disasters tied to humanity's hubris on the waves. Take the night of September 3, 1890, when fishermen near Liverpool reported a chilling sight. The silhouette of the Great Eastern, long since scrapped, looming in the harbor mist, its massive paddle wheels churning without sound. Hours later, the steamship HMS Serpent struck the reefs off Spain, drowning 172 sailors. Then in 1904, mere weeks before the infamous General Slocum fire in New York Harbor, tugboat crews swore they saw the Great Eastern's unmistakable profile, 5 smokestacks and all, gliding past Staten Island, its decks eerily empty. But the most unsettling account came from 1912, when survivors of the Titanic disaster claimed to have glimpsed a phantom steamship matching the Great Eastern's description through the iceberg fog, moments before their own ship met its fate. The timing was impossible, yet the stories persisted. What makes these sightings more than just ghost stories is the uncanny way they mirror the anxieties of the industrial age. The Great Eastern was a cautionary tale in steel, a ship so ahead of its time that it bankrupted its backers, injured its builders, and ultimately proved too vast to be profitable. Its failures foreshadowed the risks of unchecked ambition, a theme that repeated in every disaster its ghost allegedly heralded, the Titanic's sinking. A direct result of the unsinkable myth, the General Slocum's flammable neglect, a product of cost-cutting over safety, even the Serpent's wreck traced back to overconfidence in outdated charts. The Great Eastern's curse, then, wasn't just supernatural, it was symbolic. Every time its phantom appeared, it seemed to whisper a warning. The sea would always punish those who thought themselves its master. Brunel himself might have agreed. The engineer, who died broken and embittered shortly after the Great Eastern's troubled maiden voyage, once called the ship his Great Bête Noire. In life, it had been a white elephant. In legend, it became something far darker, a specter of industrial overreach, haunting an era that believed technology could conquer nature. Modern skeptics dismiss the sightings as misidentified barges or grief-stricken hallucinations. But maritime historians note a chilling pattern. The ghost's appearances peaked during periods of rapid naval innovation, from the dreadnought arms race to the luxury liner boom. Perhaps the Great Eastern's true curse was its legacy, a reminder etched in iron and mist that no ship, no matter how grand, could ever outrun the ocean's wrath. So the next time you see an old photograph of Brunel's Leviathan, towering over the docks like a metal mountain, look closely. Those shadows on its decks might just be tricks of the light. Or they might be something older, something that never truly sank, a warning adrift between the waves, waiting for the next ship to grow too proud, too fast, too soon. The ocean has a way of swallowing stories whole, but sometimes it spits one back like the Caleuche, a mystery so modern it still hums with electricity. On April 18, 2007, this 44-foot catamaran was found drifting off Australia's Great Barrier Reef, its engine idling, laptop open, and coffee cups still warm on the table. Everything was perfectly intact, food laid out, life jackets stowed, even the sails still raised, but the 3 men aboard had vanished without a trace. No distress call, no signs of struggle, just an eerie stillness, as if the crew had stepped off the deck mid-breakfast and never returned. For a world that had long dismissed ghost ships as relics of the past, the Caleuche wasn't just a mystery. It was a warning. The age of vanishing crews wasn't over. It had simply traded wooden hulls for fiberglass. What chills investigators to this day isn't just the disappearance, it's the unnerving parallels to older legends. The Caleuche's condition mirrored century-old cases like the Mary Celeste, another famously abandoned ship found with meals uneaten and personal belongings untouched. But unlike those historical enigmas, this happened in an era of satellite phones and GPS. The men-experienced sailors all had left their wallets, phones, and even a fishing rod with bait still attached. The radio worked, the engine ran. There was no storm, no leak, no logical reason for them to abandon ship. Yet the ocean had taken them anyway, reviving a fear as old as sails, that some forces at sea defy even modern explanations. Then came the sightings. In the months after the Caleuche's discovery, fishermen near the Whitsunday Islands reported glimpses of a catamaran matching its description, cutting through the waves at odd hours, its deck empty. In 2008, a charter boat captain swore he saw the Caleuche's silhouette at dusk near where it was first found, only for his radar to glitch moments later. Stranger still were the disappearances that followed. Just a year after the Caleuche incident, another yacht, the Kookaburra, vanished off Queensland with 2 seasoned sailors aboard. last seen in the same stretch of water where the phantom catamaran had been spotted. Maritime experts offer theories: rogue waves, carbon monoxide poisoning, even the Bermuda Triangle's Pacific cousin, the Devil's Sea, but locals whisper about something older. The Great Barrier Reef has long been a crossroads of indigenous dreaming stories where ancestral spirits are said to guard sacred waters. Some Aboriginal elders point to the Cas2's last known location near Hayman Island, a place traditionally called Yarrabah, meaning whirlwind. They speak of min-min lights, ghostly glows that lure travelers astray, or quinkans, shape-shifting spirits that punish those who disrespect the sea. To them, the Cas2's fate feels like an echo of ancient laws, a reminder that no technology can erase the ocean's oldest rules. Perhaps the most unsettling detail is the date. The Cas2 was found on April 18th, the same day, in 1943, when the SS African Star vanished without explanation in the same waters. Coincidence, maybe, but when the families of the missing men held a memorial at sea, they released 3 white doves. Witnesses swear the birds circled once, then flew not toward land, but east into the empty horizon, as if following a path only they could see. The official report lists the crew's fate as unknown. No closure, no answers, just a boat preserved like a museum exhibit of its own tragedy. Search teams combed thousands of square miles, but the ocean kept its secrets. Maybe that's the real lesson of the Cas2. In an age where we track storms from space and map the seafloor with drones, some vanishing still slip through the net. The sea hasn't changed, we have, and sometimes when the wind drops and the water glows a little too green at sunset, even the most modern sailors glance over their shoulders, wondering if the old stories were warnings after all. Off the fog-choked coasts of New England, where the Atlantic's gray waves claw at rocky shores, fishermen still speak in hushed tones of the octopus ship, a phantom whaler whose tattered sails emerge from the mist only when the storm winds gather. Unlike other ghost ships, this one carries a name soaked in grim history. The Octavius, a real whaling vessel lost in the Arctic ice in 1775 with its crew frozen solid at their posts. But in New England's lore, the ship didn't stay buried in the floes. It returned as a harbinger, its ghostly form sighted off Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard for generations, always before the worst gales, and always eerily before the whaling industry itself faced ruin. The most infamous sighting came in August 1871, just days before the great whaling disaster that would collapse the Arctic fleet. A schooner crew out of New Bedford reported a 3-masted ship with ice-glazed rigging drifting silently near George's Bank, its hull groaning like a living thing. As they watched, the vessel's name became visible through the fog, Octavius, spelled in rust-streaked letters. Within hours, the sky turned black and a hurricane-force storm scattered the whaling fleet, dooming 33 ships to the ice. The disaster marked the beginning of the end for New England's whaling golden age, as if the ghost ship had been a floating epitaph. Fishermen's logbooks from the 19th century are riddled with similar accounts. In 1846, a Gloucester doorman swore the octopus ship passed within oars' reach off Cape Cod, its deck lined with spectral figures hunched over rusted harpoons. A vision followed by the worst blizzard in living memory, which iced over the harbor for months. Again in 1858, a lighthouse keeper at Block Island watched the ship materialize at sunset, its sails improbably intact despite centuries of decay, only for a tsunami-like rogue wave to slam the coast at dawn. Even into the 20th century, the pattern held. In 1929, scallopers near Provincetown glimpsed the Octavius's silhouette through a veil of freezing rain hours before the Grand Banks earthquake triggered underwater landslides, severing transatlantic cables and drowning entire fishing villages in Newfoundland. What sets the octopus ship apart from other maritime phantoms is its uncanny link to ecological shifts. Indigenous Wampanoag elders have long spoken of Putupas, a spirit that manifests as a ship of the dead when the sea's balance is disturbed. To them, the Octavius's appearances coincide not just with storms, but with moments of human overreach, whaling booms, oil spills, even the warming currents that now drive fish migrations askew. Modern scientists dismiss the connection as superstition, but the timing is hard to ignore. In 2012, a research vessel tracking right whale migrations off Cape Ann logged an anomalous radar blip, a ship-shaped echo where none should exist hours before Hurricane Sandy veered unexpectedly north, its surge flooding the very docks where whalers once counted their profits. Perhaps the most chilling detail lies in the ship's name. The original Octavius achieved mythic status not just for its frozen crew, but for drifting intact through the Northwest Passage, a feat thought impossible until the ice retreated centuries later. Now, as Arctic thawing opens those same waters to modern shipping, the ghost ship's warnings feel less like folklore and more like a prophecy. When the fog rolls in thick off the New England coast, seasoned fishermen still scan the horizon for three masts where none should be. Because the Octavius wasn't just a ship, it was a mirror reflecting back the consequences of our hunger for oil, for conquest, for pushing ever deeper into waters that have long memories and longer grudges. And sometimes, when the wind dies and the gulls fall silent, the mirror sails closer. The waters off Florida's coast hide more than sunken treasure. They hold echoes of a ghostly armada, a fleet of Spanish galleons said to sail the storm winds of history. Among these phantoms, none are more infamous than the ships of the 1715 Plate Fleet, a convoy of treasure-laden vessels swallowed by a hurricane so violent it scattered gold doubloons across the seafloor from Cape Canaveral to the Florida Keys. But what chills the bones of modern sailors isn't just the wreckage, it's the sightings of these very ships reappearing in the hours before new hurricanes strike, their tattered sails billowing with the ghost of that long-ago storm. Take the summer of 1992, when a charter boat captain near Vero Beach radioed in a panicked report of wooden ships with lanterns, materializing through the haze at dusk, just as Hurricane Andrew began its deadly turn toward Miami. His description matched 17th-century Spanish galleons down to the ornate stern carvings, though none had sailed those waters in nearly 3 centuries. Hours later, Andrew made landfall as a Category 5, leaving devastation in its wake. Then in 2004, a Coast Guard helicopter crew training near the 1715 fleet's wreck site spotted an anomaly on their radar, a cluster of slow-moving blips resembling a vintage fleet. By the time they circled back, the blips had vanished, but the next day, Hurricane Francis slammed the same stretch of coast with catastrophic force. Local divers and historians note an eerie pattern. The phantom galleons are most often seen near known wreck sites of the original fleet, particularly the Urca de Lima and the Capitana, 2 treasure ships that went down with all hands. Witnesses described the same surreal details: the smell of salt-rotted wood, the groan of rigging in windless air, and most unsettling of all, the distant clang of ships' bells ringing underwater as the vision fades. These accounts mirrored Taino and Seminole legends of La Flota Fantasma, a ghostly convoy said to gather lost souls before great storms. Modern meteorologists dismiss the phenomenon as storm-induced mirages, but that doesn't explain the 17th-century ship designs reported by those who have seen them, or why these apparitions cluster along the exact path of the 1715 hurricane's fury. Perhaps the most haunting connection lies in the treasure itself. Salvagers have spent decades recovering the fleet's gold, but some say the ocean claims its price for every coin taken. In 2017, days after a team of divers excavated a hoard of emeralds from the Nuestra Senora de los Nieves, fishermen near Fort Pierce reported a spectral galleon anchored atop the wreck site, its hull glowing faintly green in the moonlight. Within 72 hours, Hurricane Irma barreled toward the Keys, its surge scattering newly placed recovery markers like chess pieces. Coincidence? Maybe, but as any salvage diver will tell you, the Atlantic remembers where its gold lies. and sometimes when the barometric pressure drops and the first storm winds stir, the past doesn't just resurface, it sails. The SS Atlantis was supposed to be a marvel of modern engineering, a ship built not from steel but from concrete, designed to prove that even the most unconventional materials could conquer the sea. Launched in 1918, this experimental vessel was one of 12 concrete ships constructed during World War I, a desperate solution to wartime steel shortages. For a brief moment, the Atlantis seemed to defy skeptics, successfully transporting troops and cargo across the Atlantic. But in June 1926, just 8 years after her maiden voyage, the ship met a humiliating end. Ripped from her moorings during a storm off Cape May, New Jersey, she ran aground just a few hundred feet from shore, her concrete hull cracking apart in the surf like a sandcastle at high tide. Yet the Atlantis refused to fade into obscurity. Almost immediately, locals began reporting eerie sightings, the ghostly outline of a concrete ship materializing in the mist, its silhouette visible just before coastal construction projects met with bizarre, inexplicable failures. The first incident occurred in 1931, when workers building a pier near the wreck site swore they saw the Atlantis's broken hull glowing faintly beneath the waves the night before their supports mysteriously collapsed. 5 years later, engineers attempting to repair a seawall at Sunset Beach watched in disbelief as their freshly poured concrete liquefied overnight, an impossibility under normal conditions, only to find tide pools shaped like the Atlantis's prow etched into the sand at dawn. The pattern continued for decades. In 1963, a dredging operation near the wreck was abandoned when equipment repeatedly malfunctioned, with crew members reporting the smell of wet cement and the sound of groaning metal in the fog. Then in 2007, during construction of a nearby condominium complex, surveyors captured a thermal image of a ship-shaped heat signature hovering where the Atlantis had sunk, just before the foundation shifted violently, sinking part of the structure into the sand. What makes these accounts so chilling is how they mirror older maritime superstitions about jinxed experimental vessels. Sailors have long believed that ships pushing the boundaries of convention, whether through radical design, untested materials, or blasphemous names, invite disaster. The Swedes feared their 16th-century warship Vasa, which sank on its maiden voyage due to fatal design flaws, still cursed the Stockholm harbor. Whalers spoke of the Essex, whose ill-fated encounter with a sperm whale inspired Moby Dick, as a marked ship long before its doom. The Atlantis fits this pattern perfectly, a vessel born from desperation and hubris, its very existence challenging the sea's ancient rules. Concrete, after all, belongs on land. To force it into service at sea was an act of defiance, and the ocean, as these legends suggest, never forgets a challenge. Modern engineers scoff at the idea of cursed concrete, pointing to the well-documented weaknesses of ferrocement ships, their brittle hulls prone to cracking in cold waters, their porous structures absorbing weight over time. But even they can't explain why so many mishaps cluster around the Atlantis's wreck site, or why witnesses consistently describe the same uncanny details: the scent of fresh mortar in salt air, the hollow clink of phantom trowels tapping unseen hulls. Perhaps the ship's ghost isn't a supernatural force, but a kind of maritime memory, a reminder that innovation, unchecked by respect for the sea's power, often ends in ruin. Today, the Atlantis's rusted ribs still protrude from the shallows at Sunset Beach, a crumbling monument to human ambition. Locals warn against taking souvenirs from the wreck, citing a string of bad luck that follows those who pocket its concrete fragments. Maybe it's just superstition, or maybe, like the ship itself, some ideas are better left undisturbed, buoyant in theory, but destined to sink when tested by deeper waters. When the fog rolls in thick over Cape May and the wind carries the sound of cracking stone, even the most rational minds might pause. Some ships don't just sink. They wait, and the Atlantis, it seems, isn't done teaching its lesson. The Atlantic during World War II was a hunting ground, a vast, dark chessboard where U-boats stalked Allied convoys and survival often hinged on luck. But amid the very real terrors of torpedoes and depth charges, sailors began whispering about something else lurking in the fog: ghost tankers. These weren't just ordinary phantoms, they were oil-stained leviathans, their silhouettes blacker than the night, spotted moments before real-life disasters struck. And none were more infamous than the so-called Black Tanker of 1943, a spectral vessel said to glide silently through convoy lanes, its appearance a death knell for any ship that crossed its path. The first documented sighting came from the crew of the SS William C. Gorgas, a Liberty ship hauling fuel to Britain. On a moonless March night, the watch officer reported a massive tanker looming suddenly off their starboard bow. No running lights, no radio response, just an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow the surrounding waves. Before they could hail it, the ship vanished. 12 hours later, U-boat Wolfpack tore through their convoy, sinking 6 vessels in under an hour. Similar accounts poured in from other seamen. A tanker spotted near Newfoundland before the massacre of convoy SC7. Another seen drifting off Iceland hours before U-549's torpedoes found their mark. The descriptions were eerily consistent: a ship with no flag, no crew visible on deck, and an unnatural stillness even as the water churned around it. What made these sightings more than just wartime jitters was their uncanny timing. The Black Tanker wasn't merely a random apparition. It materialized in specific sectors where U-boats later ambushed convoys, almost like a spectral scout marking targets. Some survivors swore the Phantom even mirrored real tankers lost earlier in the war, their rust-streaked hulls recognizable down to the paint peeling in familiar patterns. The most chilling case occurred during the Battle of the Atlantic's darkest days, when lookouts on HMS Dianthus claimed to see the Black Tanker cutting across their path moments before sonar detected a U-boat's telltale ping. The corvette dropped depth charges, but instead of oil or debris, the sea foamed with an inky blackness that clung to the waves like crude. That night, 3 ships in their group were torpedoed, their burning fuel painting the horizon crimson. Historians have tried to rationalize the phenomenon. Some point to Fata Morgana, a mirage effect that warps distant ships into grotesque shapes, except these sightings occurred at close range, often in clear weather. Others suggest mass hysteria or stress-induced hallucinations among sleep-deprived crews. But there's a third, more unsettling possibility, that the Black Tanker was a kind of collective premonition. Merchant marines and naval crews alike shared a visceral dread of oil tankers, knowing they were prime U-boat targets and death traps when ablaze. In a war where survival hinged on reading the ocean's moods, perhaps their subconscious fears took physical form, a shadow thrown ahead of coming disaster. Decades later, declassified Kriegsmarine logs added another layer to the mystery. Several U-boat captains reported anomalous sonar contacts before successful attacks, echoes of large, slow-moving vessels that vanished when pursued. One even sketched the contact in his journal, labeling it Der Schwarz Tanker. Whether the product of frayed nerves or something beyond explanation, the legend endures. Divers exploring Atlantic wrecks still speak of strange disturbances near sunken tankers' currents that move against the tide, or fleeting shadows too large to be fish. The ocean, it seems, keeps more than rusting hulls. It holds echoes, and sometimes when the wind drops and the waves go glassy, those echoes rise, not as warnings but as reminders of a time when the sea itself seemed to choose sides. Long before the skies over Pearl Harbor darkened with warplanes, Hawaiian legends spoke of something lurking beneath the waves, a phantom submarine known to locals as Mauna Kea, the wandering sea spirit. Fishermen along Oahu's southern coast told of sudden, unnatural ripples cutting through calm waters, or the distant hum of engines when no ships were near. These sightings weren't random maritime mirages, they followed a pattern. The phantom sub was most often spotted in the sacred channel of Kiawalao o Pailoa, the place now called Pearl Harbor, and always before moments of upheaval, storms, earthquakes, or the death of a chief. To the Kanaka Maoli, the sub wasn't just a ghost, it was a warning, a herald of Palikia trouble rising from the deep. Then came December 7, 1941. In the chaos of the Japanese attack, a lesser-known mystery unfolded. Hours before the first bombs fell, the destroyer USS Ward reported engaging a mysterious midget submarine near the harbor entrance, sinking it with depth charges. Naval records confirmed the encounter, but divers later found no wreckage. Even stranger, local fishermen claimed they'd seen the same sub the night before, gliding silently past the harbor lights, a sighting that aligned eerily with pre-war legends. Was it an enemy vessel or something older? The waters of Paoloa had always been considered kapu, sacred by Hawaiians, a threshold between worlds to some. The timing felt deliberate, as if the ocean itself had chosen that day to blur the lines between myth and history. What makes these stories more than coincidence is the way they echo across generations. In 1944, a Navy patrol plane reported a submarine-shaped shadow beneath the surface near the same spot where the Ward had fired, just days before a munitions barge mysteriously exploded in the harbor. Decades later, in 2001, sonar technicians training near the Arizona Memorial detected an anomalous mass moving against the current, vanishing before it could be identified. That same week, the USS Greenville accidentally struck a Japanese fishing vessel during an emergency surfacing drill, reigniting tensions over Pearl Harbor's unresolved wounds. Hawaiian elders offer a perspective Western records overlook. In their oral traditions, certain places are kupuna, elder spirits, with memories longer than human history. The Phantom Sub, they say, isn't just a relic of World War II. It's a manifestation of the channel's grief, a reminder that some wounds never fully heal, whether inflicted by cannon fire or careless hands. Modern sonar can't explain why these sightings cluster around anniversaries of the attack, or why divers sometimes report hearing metallic groans near the sunken battleships, like a door closing far below. Science calls it seismic shifting, but to those who have felt the sudden chill in those waters, the truth might be simpler and far older. The ocean remembers. And sometimes, when the past stirs in its depths, it sends shadows to the surface, not to haunt, but to teach. The Mary Celeste wasn't just an abandoned ship, it was a question mark carved into the Atlantic surface. When the brigantine was found drifting near the Azores in December 1872, her decks were eerily untouched. Breakfast dishes sat half-eaten in the galley. A child's doll lay nestled in a crewman's bunk. The cargo of industrial alcohol remained sealed, yet the lifeboat was gone, and the crew had vanished without explanation. For over a century, the mystery fueled speculation, mutiny, piracy, even sea monsters. But long after the official inquiries faded, something stranger happened. The Mary Celeste herself began reappearing, her weathered hull spotted cutting through fog banks and moonlit swells, always in the hours before another vessel met with disaster. One of the earliest documented sightings came from the crew of the British schooner Julia A. Halleck in 1884. Just off Gibraltar, they reported a derelict brigantine matching the Celeste's description drifting across their bow, her sails tattered but still catching wind. As they closed in, the ship dissolved into the mist like smoke. The next morning, their own vessel struck a submerged wreck, nearly sinking. Decades later, in 1923, a Portuguese fishing fleet near the Azores swore they saw the Celeste's ghostly outline at dusk, rigging intact, nameplate clearly visible only for a freak squall to capsize two of their boats hours later. Even the era of radar couldn't shake the legend. In 1958, the freighter SS Rappahannock logged a solid blip of a wooden ship directly in their path near the original abandonment coordinates. By the time the captain reached the bridge, the radar screen was clear, but the ship's log noted an inexplicable temperature drop and the scent of salt-crusted wood in the air. That night, their engine failed in calm seas, leaving them adrift for days. What makes these accounts more than sailors' yarn is their chilling consistency. Witnesses across different eras describe the same uncanny details: the Celeste's distinctive barrel-shaped stern, the unnatural quiet that surrounds her, and most unsettling of all, the way her sails billow against the wind. Marine historians point out that the real Mary Celeste was eventually wrecked in 1885, run aground in a Haitian coral reef by her last unscrupulous owner. But ghost ships, it seems, don't obey the laws of time or tides. Some speculate the apparitions are stress-induced hallucinations, a trick of the mind in fog or fatigue. Yet that doesn't explain why reports cluster around merchant routes plagued by disappearances, like the Bermuda Triangle's lesser-known cousin, the Azores Triangle. Perhaps the most haunting connection lies in the original crew's fate. Forensic meteorologists now believe the Celeste may have been abandoned during a cyclone, a sudden, violent sloshing of seawater caused by underwater seismic activity. These phenomena can create the illusion of a ship flooding, prompting panicked evacuations. If true, it suggests the crew launched the lifeboat only to be swallowed by the same waves they feared. In that light, the ghostly sightings take on a darker meaning. Maybe the Celeste doesn't just predict disasters, she reenacts them, trapped in an endless loop of her own tragedy, a warning written in salt and splintered wood. Modern sonar scans the ocean floor with laser precision, but some gaps remain. The Mary Celeste's wreckage in Haiti has crumbled into the reef, her bones picked clean by storms and time. Yet on certain nights, when the moon hangs low over the Azores and the wind drops to a whisper, fishermen still throttle their engines and peer into the mist. Because the sea doesn't always give up its secrets, sometimes it sends them back not as answers but as echoes, sailing forever just beyond the edge of understanding. The Lyubov Orlova wasn't supposed to become a legend. When this Russian cruise ship was abandoned in a Canadian port in 2010, left to rust over unpaid debts, authorities assumed she'd quietly rot at her moorings. But the sea had other plans. In 2013, a storm snapped her towline during a scrapping attempt, setting the vessel adrift in the North Atlantic, empty, unmanned, and utterly untethered. For months, satellite images tracked her aimless path through ice-choked waters, sparking headlines about a ghost ship on the loose. Then, just as suddenly as she'd vanished from radar, the Orlova disappeared entirely. No wreckage, no final coordinates, just an eerie vacancy where a 4,000-ton ship should have been. What makes her story more than just a maritime oddity is how perfectly it mirrors ancient warnings. A vessel without crew, cursed to wander until the ocean claims her, leaving disaster in her wake. Around the same time the Orlova began her phantom drift, another derelict was making waves literally. The Ryu Unmaru, a Japanese fishing vessel ripped from its moorings by the 2011 tsunami, spent over a year creeping across the Pacific before being spotted off Alaska's coast. Like something from a folk tale, the rusted hulk seemed to defy logic, surviving storms that should have shattered her, dodging cargo lanes thick with tankers. The U.S. Coast Guard finally sank her as a hazard, but not before locals whispered about bad luck clinging to her hull. Fishermen reported strange equipment failures near her last known position, and within weeks an oil spill blackened nearby waters. Coincidence, perhaps, but when you lay these modern drifters side by side with legends like the Flying Dutchman or the Caleuche, the parallels are hard to ignore. Historians might argue these are just cases of neglected ships meeting predictable fates, yet the timing of their appearances feels unnervingly symbolic. The Ryu Unmaru became a floating relic of the Fukushima disaster, carrying the trauma of that catastrophe across the ocean like a messenger. The Orlova, meanwhile, slipped free during a surge in Arctic exploitation, her drift charting the same waters newly opened by melting ice. Could these ships be unconscious omens, modern echoes of the old belief that phantom vessels manifest when humanity oversteps? consider the SS Baychimo, the Arctic ghost ship that haunted trade routes until industrialization changed the north. Or the Palatine Light, said to flare when immigrant hopes crash against hard shores. The ocean's warnings often wear the face of our own recklessness. Even science can't fully dismiss the eerie weight of these derelicts. Oceanographers note that ghost ships like the Orlova follow currents that trace ancient migratory paths, the same routes once navigated by the very cultures who spun these myths. The Ryu Unmaru's journey, for instance, mirrored the Kuroshio current used by Edo period sailors who told of Yurei Fune, ships crewed by drowned souls. Modern radar might track these drifters, but their paths feel less random than ritualistic, as if drawn by forces older than GPS. When the Lyubov Orlova's emergency beacon suddenly activated near Ireland, a place rich in Selkie folklore before dying again, even the most pragmatic Coast Guard officers exchanged uneasy glances. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between legend and logistics. These ships aren't supernatural, yet they've become vessels for our collective unease, about climate change, about tsunamis, about the fragile line between control and chaos. When we watch a steel hull vanish into the fog without a soul aboard, it's not just a navigational hazard we fear. It's the reminder that the sea, for all our technology, still holds the final card. The Lyubov Orlova may never be found, and the Ryu Unmaru rests in pieces on the seabed, but their stories, like all the best ghost ship tales, linger where the water meets the unknown. And somewhere out there, in the blind spots of satellite feeds and sonar pings, the next derelict is already adrift, waiting to resurrect the oldest question of all. Are these just lost ships, or is the ocean trying to tell us something? Ghost ships are more than just campfire stories. They're echoes of humanity's oldest fear, the untamed, unknowable power of the sea. For centuries, these phantom vessels have sailed the line between myth and reality, their appearances threaded through history like a dark omen. Whether it's the Flying Dutchman's cursed silhouette or the Valencia's flaming wreck, these legends share a chilling pattern. They don't just haunt the waves, they seem to predict their fury. And that's the heart of what makes them so compelling. They tap into something primal, a recognition that the ocean has always been a place of mystery, where logic dissolves like salt in water. But why do these stories endure? Maybe it's because they reflect truths deeper than superstition. Sailors have long known that the sea doesn't play by human rules. A calm surface can hide a storm building beneath, and the horizon holds secrets no radar can uncover. Ghost ships, in their own eerie way, embody that uncertainty. They're the ultimate what if. What if the past isn't truly gone? What if disaster leaves a mark not just on charts but in the very fabric of the water? When the Caleuche glides through Chilean fog before an earthquake, or the Iron Mountain materializes before a flood, it's hard to dismiss them as mere coincidence. These stories persist because they give shape to the unshakable feeling that the world is stranger than we think, and the sea, above all, keeps its own ledger. Yet in our age of satellites and sonar, it's tempting to file these tales under folklore. We map the ocean floor, track storms in real time, and scoff at the idea of phantom vessels. But consider this, even now, ships vanish without a trace. The Lyubov Orlova drifts into oblivion, the Kaz-2's crew disappears mid-voyage, modern mysteries with no tidy answers. Maybe ghost ships aren't warnings from the ocean. Maybe they're warnings from us, reminders of how little we still understand. The deeper question isn't whether these apparitions are real, but why we keep seeing them. Is it the sea speaking, or are we, in our bones, still waiting for the other shoe to drop? So here's where I'll pass the oar to you. Have you ever stood on a shore and felt the hair rise on your neck for no reason? Spotted a shadow on the waves that shouldn't be there? The ocean stories don't end with these legends, they ripple outward, waiting for new voices to carry them. Drop your own eerie encounters in the comments below. And the next time you hear foghorns in the distance, remember, some ships never dock, they just sail on, trailing questions in their wake.